Assessment in Learning. Three Types of Learning by Anderson's and Krathwohl's Taxonomy 2001. Benjamin Bloom, a proponent of Bloom's taxonomy and a committee of colleagues in 1956, identified three domains of educational activities: the cognitive, referring to the mental skills; affective, referring to growth in feeling of emotion; and psychomotor, referring to manual or physical skills. These terms were regarded as too technical by practicing teachers, and so the domains were translated to knowledge, skills, and attitudes. These domains are organized into categories or level and arranged in hierarchical order from the simplest behavior to the most complex behavior. It started by the basic and end with the more advanced level, to ensure that the learning outcome should be stated as concrete and active verbs. It should be real. The knowledge is being applied because it happens in the real scenario, providing the authenticity of the action. In mid-90s, a former student of Bloom, Lauren Anderson, together with David Krathwohl, reviewed the cognitive domain objectives and effected some changes. The two most proponent of this are changing the names in the 6 subdivisions from noun to verb, and rearranging the order of the last 2 sentences and evaluation. As you observe in 1956 Bloom's taxonomy, as stated in the figure, the synthesis is in the 5th spot, but in the revised version it became, and the position of it is in the highest level, but in the verb form. It became creating. The evaluation in the Bloom's taxonomy is in the highest spot, but in the revised version it became in the 5th spot, below the creating. Evaluation is in the highest level in Bloom's taxonomy, but in the revised version, the creating is in the highest level. First, I am going to discuss what are the meaning of each level in the original Bloom's taxonomy and the examples of the verbs. First level is the knowledge, remembering or retrieving previously learned material. Examples of the verbs that relate to this function are know, identify, relate, list, define, recall, memorize, repeat, record, name, recognize, and acquire. The activity for memorize is that when the teacher will give a piece of poem to students, and then in the other day they will recite in front of the class. The activity for define is that the teacher will give the topic about solar system. Then after the lesson, the teacher will ask the students to define Earth, Mars, or Saturn. Comprehension, the ability to grasp or construct meaning from material. Examples of verbs that relate to this function are restate, locate, report, recognize, explain, express, identify, discuss, review, infer, illustrate, interpret, draw, represent, differentiate, and conclude. The activity for comprehension, the teacher will present a graph about the weather forecast in the country, then the student will locate the area that corresponds to the question of the teacher. Application, the ability to use learned material or to implement material in the new and concrete situations. Example of verbs that relate to this function are apply, relate, develop, translate, use, operate, organize, employ, restructure, interpret, demonstrate, illustrate, practice, calculate, show, exhibit, and dramatize. The activity for demonstrate is that the students will demonstrate their volcano experiments in their laboratory. And second example is the dramatized experience. The teacher will group the students and then they will going to dramatize or act the life of Rizal.
Analysis, the ability to break down or distinguish the parts of material into its components so that its organizational structure may be better understood. Examples of verbs that relate to this function are analyze, compare, prove, inquire, examine, contrast, categorize, differentiate, contrast, investigate, detect, survey, classify, deduce, experiment, scrutinize, discover, inspect, dissect, discriminate, and separate.
The activity for categorize in the subject English, the teacher will give sentences about the subject-verb agreement. And then the students will underline which is the subject and the verb.
Synthesis, the ability to put parts together to form a coherent or unique new whole. Example of verbs that relate to this function are compose, produce, design, assemble, create, prepare, predict, modify, tell, plan, invent, formulate, collect, set up, generalize, document, combine, relate. Propose, develop, arrange, construct, organize, originate, derive, and write. The activity of compose is that the teacher will let the students to compose their own sentences in the board or in a sheet of paper. Evaluation, the ability to judge, check, and even critique the value of material for a given purpose. Examples of verbs that relate to this function are judge, assess, compare, evaluate, conclude, measure, deduce, argue, decide, choose, rate, select, estimate, validate, consider, appraise, value, criticize, and infer.
The activity for the value, the students will present their artwork if the teacher will give them activity to draw. Then the student in class will explain the value of his or her artwork in his life or her life and in the community. Benjamin Bloom critically examined his own cognitive taxonomy and he noted that there is a fundamental difference between the knowledge category first level in his taxonomy and the five mental or higher level in his taxonomy: the comprehension, the analysis, synthesis, and evaluation performed on that knowledge or within that knowledge. Mere recall of knowledge is different from comprehension, analysis, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation of that knowledge because the five levels deals with performing the knowledge. Bloom also identified specific types of knowledge, such as terminology, technical application, such as knowing the terms of computer software and hardware, subject or study, specific facts, something that is true or something that has occurred or has been proven correct, conventions, trends and sequences, classifications and categories, criteria, methodology, principles and generalization, theories and structures. In the revised cognitive taxonomy, Anderson and Krathwohl identified four levels of knowledge: factual, conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive knowledge. Let us now compare the specific type of knowledge given by Bloom and how they differ to each other. Factual. As the name implies, this refers to essential facts, terminology, data, or elements students must know or be familiar with in order to understand a discipline or solve a problem. solve the problem in it. Example of knowledge or of terminology are vocabulary terms, mathematical symbols, musical notation, alphabet, knowledge of specific details and elements or components of food pyramid, names of congressional representatives, major battles in World War II. Conceptual. This refers to interrelationship of facts put together within a larger structure that enable them to function together. Knowledge of classifications and categories such as species of animals, different kinds of arguments, geological era, knowledge of principles and generalizations such as type of conflict in literature, Newton's laws of motions, principles of democracy, knowledge of theories, models and structures such as theory of evolution, economic theory, and DNA models. Procedural knowledge. This is knowing how to do something. Refers to information or knowledge that helps students to do something specific to discipline, subject, or area of study. It includes knowledge of methods of inquiry, criteria for using skills, algorithms, techniques, and methods. Knowledge of subject-specific skills and algorithms. Procedure for solving quadratic equations, mixing colors for oil painting, serving a volleyball. Knowledge of subject-specific techniques and methods. Literary criticism, analysis of historical documents, mathematical problem-solving methods. Knowledge of criteria for determining when to use appropriate procedures. Methods appropriate for different kinds of experiment. Statistical analysis. Procedures used for different situations. Syllabus. Guidelines for different genres of writing. Metacognitive knowledge. This is knowing what you know. This is thinking about own thinking in a purposeful way. It is awareness and knowledge of one's own cognition. It is a reflective knowledge about how to go about solving problems and cognitive tasks. It includes contextual and conditional knowledge and knowledge of self. Strategic knowledge. Ways of memorizing facts, reading comprehension strategies, methods of planning a website. Knowledge about cognitive tasks including appropriate contextual and conditional knowledge, different reading demands of textbooks and novels, thinking ahead when using an electronic database, differences between writing emails and writing business letters. Self-knowledge. Need for a diagram or chart to understand complex processes. Better comprehension in quiet environment. Need to discuss ideas with someone before writing an essay. This table represents the cognitive processes across the knowledge dimension. I will give a situation and I will apply the knowledge dimension and that domain. In Factual, remembering the terms of the computer software, then step 2 is understanding the use of it. The step 3 is applying. You do the basic computer operation by exploring. The step 4 is analyze. You have to analyze if the steps you follow is correct. Evaluate, which is convenient to use. Your own steps or the steps that was presented in your research. Lastly is create. You can now make your own file and print what you research. The same procedure in the conceptual. Procedural and metacognitive. These are the example activities based on the revised version of Anderson and Krathwohl's in Bloom's Taxonomy. Cognitive processes and examples. Remembering. Produce the right information from memory. Recognizing. Identify frogs in a diagram of different kinds of amphibian. Find an isosceles triangle in your neighborhood. Another one, answer any true or false or multiple choice question. Recalling, name 3 19th century women English authors. Write the multiplication facts.
Reproduce the chemical formula for carbon tetrachloride. Understanding. Make meaning from educational materials or experiences. Interpreting. Translate a story, problem into algebraic equation. Interpreting. Draw a diagram of a digestive system. Paraphrase Jawaharlal Nehru's Tryst with Destiny speech. Exemplifying. Draw a parallelogram. Find an example of stream of consciousness style of writing. Name a mammal that lives in our area. Classifying. Label numbers odd or even. List the events of the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. Group native animals into their proper species. Inferring. Read a passage of dialogue between two characters and make conclusion about their past relationship. Figure out the meaning of an unfamiliar term from the context. Look at a series of numbers and predict what the next number will be. Comparing. Explain how the heart is like a pump. Compare Mahatma Gandhi to a present-day leader. Use a Venn diagram to demonstrate how two books by Charles Dickens are similar and different. Explaining. Draw a diagram explaining how air pressure affects the weather. Provide details that justify why the French Revolution happened when and how it did. Describe how interest rates affect the economy. Applying. Use a procedure. Executing. Add a column of two-digit numbers. Orally read a passage in a foreign language. Have a student open house discussion. Implementing. Design an experiment to see how plants grow in different kinds of soil. Proofread a piece of writing. Create a budget. Analyzing. Break a concept down into its parts and describe how the parts relate to the whole. Differentiating. List the important information in a mathematical word problem across out the unimportant information. Draw a diagram showing the major and minor characters in a novel. Organizing. Place the books in the classroom library into categories. Make a chart or often use figurative devices and explain their effect. Make a diagram showing the ways plants and animals in your neighborhood interact with each other. Attributing. Read letters to the editor to determine the author's points of view about a local issue. Determine a character's motivation in a novel or short story. Look at the brochures of political candidates and hypotheses about their perspectives and issues. Evaluating. Make judgments based on criteria and syllabus guidelines. Checking. Participate in a writing group, giving peers feedback on organization and logic of our arguments. Listen to a political speech and make a list of any contradictions within the speech. Review a project plan to see if all the necessary steps are included. Creating. Put pieces together to form something new or recognize components of a new structure. Generating. Given a list of criteria, list some options for improving race relations in the school. Generate several scientific hypotheses to explain why plants need sunshine. Propose a set of alternatives for reducing dependence on fossil fuels that address both economic and environmental concerns. Come up with alternative hypotheses based on criteria. Planning. Make a storyboard for a multimedia presentation on insects. Outline a research paper on Mark Twain's view on religion. Design a scientific study to test the effect of different kinds of music on hens egg production. Producing.
Write a journal from the point of view of mountaineer. Build a habitat for pigeons. Put in a play based on a chapter from a novel you're reading. These cognitive activities are very helpful in enhancing the knowledge of the learners and giving them explanations in how important to apply knowledge in our lives, providing what they need impact their motivation and the belief that experience is a tool in achieving a goal.